What is going on, everybody? Welcome back in. This is Hawk Talk on Melrose. I am Collin, joined today with Tyler. Thank you for tuning in as always. On today's episode, Tyler and I are going to get into the spring game from yesterday. We are recording this on Sunday, April 21st. Unfortunately, we were not at the game yesterday, or I should say scrimmage, but credit goes to 24/7. They put up a video of every single play, 7-on-7, and then also the scrimmage, 11-on-11. And it was as if we were both there. I got to see every single play, and I have my thoughts, and Tyler has his thoughts as well. So we're going to get into that today. And then we will end this episode off talking Tim Lester's presser from the other day. There was an interesting quote that really stood out to me, and we'll get into that. But before we get there, you can find Hawk Talk on Melrose on your favorite podcast app, including Apple and Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and also on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, leave a review, comment. We appreciate anything and everything. We are probably going to do some mailbag type episodes moving forward here in the next couple weeks, months, now that we're kind of entering kind of that dead cycle, the dead period. There's really not going to be a whole lot to talk about. Now, the transfer portal is open right now for the next couple of weeks, so there'll probably be an episode or two dedicated to that. But after that, it's really going to be kind of slow until we get it more into summer and into fall camp. So we're probably going to do some mailbag questions. So make sure you leave a comment on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you're on, or on Twitter, Hawk Talk Melrose, and we will answer those questions on upcoming episodes. So that is it for that. Let's now begin the episode. Before we really get into it, I do want to kind of mention some of the players that were out yesterday. And it's like this every year for spring game. It seems like there's always more players than you want out, but it's not because it's serious injuries. It's just one of those things where it's like you don't want to risk anything else. So like they sit guys out, even though like if it was an actual game, they would be playing. I mean, let's face it, during the middle of the season, every guy is hurt. And much like yesterday, a lot of these guys would have played if it was an actual game. But yeah, offensively, we had Logan Jones, Jennings Dunker, both assumed starters on the offensive line out. Addison Ostrenga, the backup tight end, out. Seth Anderson, who is assumed to be kind of the starter wide receiver alongside Caleb Brown, he was out. And then LaShawn Williams, even though I do think Caleb Johnson, now that he's fully healthy, he's going to take over the starting job. But LaShawn Williams did start a lot last year. So those guys were out on the offensive side of the ball. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Kyle Fisher, Jamari Harris, our starting corner, Yahweh Black, our starting defensive tackle, and then Cohen Entringer, who is kind of the backup safety for Quinn Schulte. He was out as well. So some outs. I think another player like Alex Mota, he's a wide receiver. He hasn't played much. So, but he was also out yesterday as well. But so for me, kind of the biggest thing, kind of the biggest takeaway, my overall thoughts to begin this is we have to remember that it is only one practice. And so going into the spring game yesterday, and I said this on the last episode, we have to temper expectations a little bit. New system, good defense, guys out. There was some good, there was some bad. And we'll get into all that. So that's kind of my first thing. You can't really take much away from one practice. I'm sure in their 15 practices that they had this spring, there was some good days and there were some bad days. Unfortunately, we only get to see one practice out of the 15 practices. And so your hope is that that one practice is going to be good, but sometimes it's not. And I think yesterday, for the most part, it was kind of like 50-50. Like I said, there was some good, there was some bad. It wasn't like I was blown away, and it wasn't like I was like, wow, we have a long, long ways to go.
Yeah, I think, it's kind of like that every spring game. I feel like especially when we talk about it on here, right? Like we understand that we do not have the full complement of players available ready for this. And it's not like it's like a 7 or 11-on-11 practice where we're going at it. This is, or like essentially like a game. It's the spring game, but it's more like practice. And, it's the first time really in front of fans, for the off season, which is good to play in front of, even if it is a small crowd. But like you said, it's more about tempering expectations, realizing you just listed how many guys, especially on offense, right, where they're not playing at key positions, let alone, like you mentioned, new offense, new offensive coordinator, new voice out there. So it's more about just installing the offense, implementing this new style and this new, game plan with Tim Lester, what he brings, and, doing it with what we have. And, go building off of it. I mean, obviously, once you get those guys back that are, either out or, it's more like you said, precautionary, or like in Cade's case, obviously season-ending injury. You know, that's when you'll really know, but that you're not even going to know maybe even in week one, right? Like, yeah, I feel like you really start hitting your stride as you get into the second, third, fourth game maybe. So, but for right now, it's more about just learning this new offense and seeing what we have with the guys available.
So I'm going to go into what I'm encouraged by and then kind of discouraged by from yesterday. So first thing, encouraged by, it does look different. I mean, watching the videos, watching every single clip, shout out all the reporters that did that. The ones I watched was from Sean on 24/7. He put one up on YouTube. He literally put every single clip up. It was as if I was there. And just watching it, it does look different. Updated scheme. The pro style is never going to go away. And we never thought that was going to happen. Anyone that thought we were going to go to a spread offense and things like that, it's never going to happen, right? But it does look updated. It looks like a pro style offense. It looks like a modern NFL offense. And that's kind of what we've been reading, is that's kind of what Lester is kind of wanting to do. Being with Matt LaFleur last year at the Packers, taking maybe some stuff from Shanahan's offense, things like that, the West Coast offense. So it does look updated. I love that. I like what I saw from the run game yesterday. I thought it looked a lot more crisp. Now, yes, it's the same base plays with the inside zone, outside zone, split zone, counter, but there's more emphasis on motion, on misdirections, more toss plays, more pitch plays, which I like. It looked noticeably different in the run game. Doing those little things, it keeps the defense from crashing in. And that's what has been happening the last how many years. We do the same, just outside zone, right? There's no motions, no nothing. And then the defenses just get sucked in. The linebackers crash. And then we wonder why the offensive line's so bad. Well, yeah, I mean, I wonder why, right? So doing those little things, it keeps the defense from doing that, keeps them on their heels a little bit. And frankly, with the run game, I think, like I said, it looked pretty good despite having two offensive linemen out, Jennings Dunker and Logan Jones, and then also LaShawn Williams out. I thought Caleb Johnson and Kamari Moulton did really good. Didn't really see much from Jaswin. He had a couple of nice runs, but I am still convinced. I would be shocked if Patterson is still in a Hawkeye uniform come the first game.
Yeah.
I really think if there's one guy that's going to transfer, it would be him. Kamari Moulton played way more yesterday. That tells me something, right? Like he's probably already surpassed him. And there's already Caleb Johnson. There's already LaShawn Williams. So I would love for Patterson to say, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. Some more things I'm encouraged by. More motion. I mean, I just talked about in the run game, but just in general, I think most plays had some sort of motion in it. RPOs, that's something that Lester ran a lot at Western Michigan that we're going to kind of incorporate. I did say on the last episode, like, I don't think we're going to run much of it. Maybe we will. I don't know. Yesterday, we did run some RPOs. I think Marco looked a lot more comfortable in that. He actually took some plays and actually ran, and I think that's good to see. In terms of the passing game, the passing concepts, the routes, they looked okay. There was some quick reads, some quick throws, but, and this is where I'm going to get into the discouraged by, it's hard to really know about the passing game because I did think both quarterbacks did not look that good. We'll start with Deacon Hill. Look, I mean, he looked pretty bad yesterday. Let's just be honest. I thought Marco actually, as a scrimmage went on, looked a lot better. Both had timing issues, which I feel like Deacon, it's like, is that ever going to improve? Probably not, because he's just not a very good quarterback. He's not a D1 quarterback. And they just had both of them had some bad passes here or there. Deacon, like I said, though, I thought looked a lot worse. He had that one interception that looked horrible. And, but at the same time, like I said, I think Marco, for the most part, looked better than he did. Now, with Marco, I'm sure there's things that need to be polished up with him. Consistent thrower, better accuracy on his throws. Timing probably needs to be a little bit better, but I don't know. I love the running aspect of Marco. If he can polish up his passing game a little bit, I like what I have in him, but the problem is he's still so young, and that's kind of where I'm at. So that's one thing. And then the last thing is the wide receivers did have some drops. Wish I would have seen more out of Dane Howard and Bowie, is going into this game. There's been a lot of rave about them. I said on the last episode, I got to wait to see it to believe it. And yesterday, I didn't really see much. I mean, Caleb Brown looked really good, but outside of that, it was like, eh. And once again, it probably goes more to the quarterback play than anything else. But that was probably another thing that I was maybe a little discouraged by. But yeah, so there you go. Thoughts?
Yeah, I first of all, you talk a lot about the run game, Colin. What is Iowa known for? Running the football. And I feel like these last couple of years, we have been
Yep.
we have gotten away from that identity. I mean, not that we've really gotten away from it. It's just that's all we can do, right? And all we do is run the football because we can't throw it. That's number one. And then you talked about it. Just the lack of creativity, the predictability, if you will, of our run game is so bad. So it's one thing to not be able to pass the ball, but then when you're literally running the ball to the point where the defense literally knows what you're going to do,
Yep.
I mean, well, then you'd have no chance. And that's why we have, one of the worst offenses in the country, if not the worst offense. So it's great to see sort of the different aspects that Tim is bringing in. You mentioned the motion. Gosh, even if it's just, like you said, getting the linebackers to have to respect the guy coming across the field. You have to account for it. Your eyes, even if it's a split second, have to watch that motion guy. The ability to hand it off to him, the ability to, like you said, to go away from it, to jet sweep it, to throw it to him, all the different things that you can do with motion. And then also it helps the quarterback, right? Because if you see the guy flowing with the motion guy, you kind of know it's man to man. And that gives you a read, a key, if you will, for the quarterback. So it helps everybody out. The fact that we didn't utilize that in the past is sad. And I'm glad Tim recognized that and is obviously adapting to, modern football, not even college football or NFL, just modern football. So I love that, like you said. And I thought you're exactly right, dude. Our running backs, I'm so excited for them. I think they're going to have a big year. And you're right, though. It's such a deep room right now where it's like you probably don't expect all those guys to stay. Like if it's a guy like Jazzian, like you mentioned, or somebody that realizes like, man, I'm going to fall so far behind the depth chart. Like,
yeah,
I'm probably going to have to transfer out. Again, not a bad problem to have right now, though. So I'm not mad about that. And yeah, I think it's apparent, like you mentioned, the other thing, and we'll talk about it. Getting a quarterback in the transfer portal is going to be huge. Because I mean, you go on, you go on Twitter and you follow any of those guys, I mean, that were there, they were all kind of mentioning how it's kind of imperative that we go out and get somebody to at least, obviously push for the starting job. I mean, that's what you really want. You don't want a guy to come in and just, I'm the backup. Like really push Cade for the starting spot. And then if, you get it, great. And if you're a backup, then hey, your chances of playing are still kind of high with Cade's injury history, with his, inability to stay healthy, obviously coming off 2 season-ending injuries. I mean, you've got to realize that when you come in, like, I've got a chance to actually play meaningful football. So that's the other thing, like you mentioned, and that all builds off of. Or go ahead. Were you gonna say something?
I was just gonna say with Cade, I love Cade more than the next guy. Like, right, like I respect and I really like Cade, but
yeah,
what we don't really owe Cade anything. I mean, what has he really done for us? So yes, go out and get a transfer. Tell that transfer, hey, you could beat this guy out. Just because he was here last year, like you can go in and beat this guy out. And like I said, I love Cade. I hope that he can stay healthy. I hope he has a fantastic year for Iowa because he's been nothing but he's really taken in kind of that true Iowan. Like you could just tell he loves, yes. And he just loves being at Iowa. And I want nothing more for him to seize. But at the same time though, what has he done that it's like, okay, you're clearly the number one starter. No, you go out and get a transfer and have them compete in August and whoever goes, right. But, and that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yep. 100%. And then that's kind of what, I was echoing there. It's like you said, as much as I love Cade hasn't really done anything for this team in the last how many years, and it's not really his fault. It's injuries. But you can't rely on Cade being healthy again and just being like, oh well, hopefully he stays healthy for a whole season and we don't have to play Deacon Hill. Dude, if we have to get a quarterback in the transfer portal, somebody that can come in and execute the offense at a high level. And like Deacon is the only reason Deacon here because he already has a scholarship and like he's just because I keep reading like it's like he knows he's not going to play type of thing. Like he's just out here in the spring game just because he has the most experience type of thing. Is
Yep.
that your vibe on it?
That's kind of where I'm getting. I know Chad and Scott
Yeah.
talked about that too. I really think it's because, with this new system, he's the best at just executing it for the other 10 guys that are around him, right?
Yeah.
But I think he knows deep down, yeah, he's never going to probably play again. If we get a transfer quarterback, it can't just be just some random quarter. It needs to be somebody that can come in, that can compete for that starting job. And if they don't get it, if Cade's still the guy, then at least we feel comfortable that, okay, this backup can at least, like, we don't have to worry if
Run
Cade
the
goes
offense.
down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why going back in January when Ty Thompson from Oregon was going to come and do a visit, I was like ecstatic about that because it's like, man, not only can this guy be a good backup, but man, he could probably beat out Cade, maybe. And if he doesn't, well, he's going to be a hell of a backup for us for 1 year, kind of a 1 year rental.
Yeah.
And then obviously when Cade leaves, then he can be the main starter. So that's what we need. We can't just go out and find some random quarterback. Okay, we got a quarterback. No, it has to be somebody that makes sense and can
Like
actually
like a guy that's like
for the starting
third string guy on some team that's just like he's just in it because it's like, no, go get a guy that, like you said, is looking to start, essentially.
Yep, exactly. And then I guess now since we're talking about the transfer portal, we can kind of get into that too. Then so quarterback. I think after yesterday, I said on the last episode by myself, I wasn't as like, okay, we need a wide receiver. But I think after watching yesterday, I think it's a must that we get another wide receiver. Just get one more. Now, it doesn't help that Seth Anderson didn't play yesterday. I have expectations for him. I think he has a potential. We saw that in like the first two games last year, and then it just like went away. We didn't utilize him. But even with him, though, it's like I would still love to get another guy. And going back to the quarterback, it needs to be somebody that makes sense. We can't just go out and find some random wide receiver that's never going to play or, is going to play towards the end of the year. No, like we need somebody that can come in and like compete for the starting job. Now, I think it's going to be Caleb Brown's. He's a starter no matter what. But you have two wide receivers out there at most times, right? So can this person compete and be that second guy, right? So that's kind of where I'm at for that. And then defensively, I wouldn't mind getting a defensive tackle just for backup. And we'll talk about the defense here shortly and the reasons why I kind of want to just like a backup defensive tackle, but that's not as big of a priority as it is quarterback and wide receiver. Not to mention, we also just got yesterday, we landed the guy from North Dakota, Cade Board, All-American FCS. The problem with him, though, is we have so much depth at guard that he's not going to impact this year. But moving forward, we lose a lot of guys after this next year. And so that's pretty big there.
Yeah. And again, that's a position where having a multitude of guys to be able to build depth on like an offensive line is so huge. So great pickup. Like you said, freshman All-American or FCS All-American. What year? How old is he?
I think he was I think he was a freshman FCS All-American.
Okay.
And then he was also like the newcomer of the year or something like that.
Nice. Okay.
So
he's got, probably a decent amount of eligibility left. So
he has 3 years of eligibility left.
Yeah. So that's awesome.
Huge.
I agree with you though. You've talked about it before, specifically at the wide receiver position. It's like, we need a guy that's like, like a big bodied receiver that can go make plays. I feel like we're lacking in that department a little bit. Like we have guys like Caleb and Seth, but they're kind of shorter guys.
Yep. We
don't have Weejan. Yep. Exactly. We don't have that big bodied guy that it's almost like, man, if we had to go get a 50-50 ball, right? A 6'3", 6'4" guy that can go up and get it. I feel like that's personally what
we do. But just no experience. Like Dane Howard's 6'4", Jarrett Bowie's 6'3", I believe, or 6'2" or 6'3". But the problem with those two guys, it's like they have no game experience. Like, how do we know that they're going to be able to step up come August 31st or 6 weeks from there when we're playing Ohio State? Like, how do we know those guys are going to be able to step up? Right.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. So, if I'm being picky, I agree there. I think that's something. And then, I keep hearing, defensive line, like we're a little bit thin at that position, especially the tackle spot. And that's more maybe just experience as well. I feel like, we have a couple of starters that have had experience, but beyond that, it's a little thin. But we'll talk about the defense. And I always think another corner, personally. I just think guys get injured, guys, miss time. It's like having depth at that position, like we always talk about too, is always important. If I'm, creating a little wish list.
So before we get into defense, just one more just quick thing about the offense. A couple other things that I liked from yesterday. No
Yeah.
fullback. I love seeing that.
Yeah.
We didn't run
I heard that.
fullback.
More of an H back, right?
Yeah, H back.
Yeah,
With
I love that too.
I can't think of his name right now. I can't think of his name. I'm
Hayden
blanking out.
Large.
Yep, Hayden Large. Yep.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love seeing, and I sent this to you, the pistol formation.
Hey, Collin's been calling for that on
I've
this
been saying
podcast
that
for years.
I love the pistol formation. It's nothing new. It's nothing creative. It's been used for the last decade, but it's something that I've always felt like with Iowa. It's like, why don't we run out of the pistol?
We run the football.
Yes.
You get those guys going downhill right away. Like it creates such an advantage.
So I saw that yesterday, like 2 plays, which it's like, oh, only 2 plays were ran yesterday, but we didn't run that many plays yesterday. So seeing it was at least
We've never seen
I love
it done
that.
Before.
Yeah.
So that's huge.
I like that we got Caleb Johnson involved in the passing game. I've been saying that for years. Like, we got to get the running backs more involved. You got a guy, you throw him an out route that could turn into 5 to 10 yards. And with Caleb, his burst, his physicality, like, yeah, let's do it more often. And there was a couple plays yesterday that they did that. And then, just overall stars on the offensive side for me yesterday was Caleb Brown. He had some nice catches. He had a lot of he caught it and got 10 more yards out of it. Just that burst of speed. I mean, he's clearly the most athletic guy on our team on the offense for sure. And then Kamari Moulton, I thought looked really good, had a couple nice runs. And then Terrell Washington at wide receiver. I mentioned that on the last episode about how he switched to wide receiver, guy that can always go back to running back if we need him. But I like where he's at wide receiver. He can be kind of like that X kind of Deebo Samuel type player for us. And he had some nice catches yesterday as well. So those were kind of my stars on Saturday.
Yeah, you talked about Terrell Washington. I mean, you've been hearing that for a while. It's like, and you just mentioned about how getting the running backs more involved with the guys kind of transitioning from a running back to a receiver, which is only going to help our receiver room, but also you can utilize him kind of, like you mentioned, in a multitude of ways, handing it off to him, giving him, some throws to him. I love that. I've been saying that for so long too. It's like, get your best players involved in any way, shape, or possible. Like you mentioned, Caleb Brown and these running backs. Like, you remember when we had CJ Beathard and we would and then I think it was him, and then we had Akram Wadley, who we just used in so many different ways because we had to.
Because we didn't really have anything else.
Good. Yeah, he was so good. But you just that's what it's like we almost went away from that. It's so weird because I'm not saying Caleb Brown is as quick as Akram Wadley. I'm just saying he's still a good pass catcher. You get him the ball in any way possible. So that's just more a little side rant that I've, been saying for a long time too. And then, I agree with you, man. It's crazy. I don't know. The running back room is really good. I'm excited for it. And then you mentioned pistol. God, dude, I'm so pumped for that. That's part of the game plan. If we're running it in a spring game, that's part of it. So
I think you're going to see some of it. Yeah.
Just, and I don't even know if you call it creativity. It's just a better offense. It's more modernized. It's
finally updated. Something we've been asking for years.
Yeah. And
defense.
As much shit as we give these players, sometimes even quarterbacks in the past, it's like, what do you expect them to do with the type of offense we had in the past? Not to pile on Brian, but fuck you, Brian.
Let's switch to defense now. Just 2 things with the defense. It's kind of amazing how pretty much all our talk ever this offseason, rightfully so, has been the offense with Tim Lester and the offense coordinator, things like that. Defense has kind of been scrubbed under the rug a little bit, and still really good. Defensive line, big talking point, I think, out of anything, is probably the biggest talking point. I thought it looked solid for the most part yesterday, despite not having Yahweh Black. I thought Jeremiah Pittman, Brian Allen, and Max Llewellyn looked pretty good. The lack of depth at the defensive tackle does scare me a little bit. Pittman is really the only backup with experience. So, I mean, yes, once Yahweh Black comes back, you have him, Aaron Graves, and Jeremiah Pittman, but all it takes is one injury, and you still want another guy. Like, I always think with the defense line, you want to have at least 8 guys, right? Because you're constantly rotating in and out. And that's just what scares me a little bit. But man, like Phil Parker at his presser on Thursday did not seem worried at all about it. I mean, he was, and I guess you got to trust the GOAT when it comes to that type of stuff. But for me, it's like, I don't know. I would still like to get maybe one more guy at defensive tackle just to have solidified backups for sure. And then I think the corner is a little bit more interesting than we think it is. So yesterday, John Nestor, who is kind of like a young Riley Moss, and Phil Parker, every time he talks about this guy, just nothing but good things to say about him. It's almost to the point where it's like, I think Phil wants him out there as much as possible because he is good. And like I said, he's a young Riley Moss. If he can be anything like Riley Moss, I think that's a good thing. And then TJ Hall played a lot yesterday, and he was hurt most of last year. So you had kind of two backups starting yesterday, and they looked decent. Jamar Harris has been out all of spring. He should be back fine. And then Deshaun Lee was a little bit limited yesterday. So I think that's a good problem to have, is having guys that, how are we going to do this next year? Is it going to be Jamar Harris and John Nestor? Is it going to be Jamar Harris, Deshaun Lee? Is it going to be, is TJ Hall good enough where, we got to play him a little bit? So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how that kind of all shakes out there. But for me, that was kind of it with the defense. I thought for me, the stars of the defense were Carson Shaw, backup linebacker. Unfortunately, he's not going to play much this year, which is a good problem to have because we have really good linebackers. And then Brian Allen Jr., who is the defensive end for us. And we will see him a lot. He won't start, but he will be coming in a lot. So those are kind of the two guys for me. A lot of the main guys didn't play much yesterday. Nick Jackson didn't play. He was very limited, rightfully so. Jay Higgins, Sebastian Castro, Xavier didn't really play much. So they really were playing the young guys. And I think that's probably been the case pretty much this entire spring. You already know what you have in those guys. Let's get the younger guys in there. Let's get them practicing. Let's get them up to speed. That way, if there is an injury or down the road when these guys leave, you guys are ready to go.
Yeah. Once you heard all those guys on defense coming back for another year, it's almost like I'm not too worried about the defense. I trust Phil. Phil's going to make it work. He's got his guys back for the most part. Obviously there'll be some new key contributors in certain spots, but it's even like you said, it's about getting those guys ready. But I'm just excited for another stud defense, another stellar defense. And yeah, you mentioned a couple of guys like Brian Allen. I think he's a stud. And I mean, what did he have? Would have been a couple of sacks yesterday in the spring game.
I think at least 2 to 3.
Yeah. Yep. So I think he's going to be, I think he'll be a key contributor this year. Like you said, probably won't start obviously, but he'll get his time, especially if he keeps performing well. And then, yeah, you mentioned it and I mentioned it. It's like maybe getting another defensive tackle. I still think maybe getting another corner if you can, but that's not imperative. I feel like it's more of a wish list item for me. An experienced guy, if you will, at corner would be nice. Just because, yeah, you don't have a ton of experience behind Jamari and behind Deshaun Lee. So that would just be my two things.
It was good to see last year. I'm glad it ended up happening now that we're now at this stage where Deshaun Lee had a lot of experience last year with, the first 2 games, Jamar Harris was out due to suspension. So he had to play those first 2 games, one being the Iowa State game on the road in Ames. And then the other one was Cooper Jean getting hurt towards the end of the year. As much as
it's weird how he doesn't have experience, but he almost does because of those things you mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, he ended up playing the first 2 games, and then he played. When did Cooper get hurt? He got hurt. I don't think he didn't play the Illinois game. I think he got hurt before the Illinois game. So he didn't play Illinois, Nebraska, Michigan, and Tennessee. So essentially Deshaun Lee played 6 games last year, which is big. And if you think about it, those things didn't happen, he wouldn't have played at all. So having that little bit of experience is big. But yeah, that's really it for the defense. I mean, there's just not much. I mean, I think it's going to be another solid defense. Is it going to be as good as last year's defense? I think it's going to be tough just because you do lose Joe Evans and Logan Lee. And I think both of those players were a lot better than what we ever imagined. Like, those were really good players for us. But at the same time, though, and this is just so funny with Iowa's defense and with Phil Parker and with, just our defensive coaching staff in general. Think about like Logan Lee and Joe Evans. When they came to Iowa, we probably looked at those guys and we're like, they're not, they're never. So guarantee you there's some guys on that defensive line that we have never heard of and that are like, oh, this guy's never going to play. And then they end up being studs for us. And it seems like every year there's always a few. And I think this year it's going to be guys I just mentioned before, Max Llewellyn. He's the backup defensive end, guarantee. And Phil Parker said nothing but good things about him too. Like he's going to be that next guy in line. I feel like it's just going to be a stud for us. Or think about Ethan Hurkett, right? That's the type of guy that.
And he played well at the end of the year.
He did.
Last year.
2 years ago was horrible. I remember my dad just hated him, like seeing him out there. And then he really turned it on. And now he's going to be pretty good for us, right? So I'm just never worried about that. And same goes with like the safety position, like Quinn Schulte, right? It seems like every year we always have that corner that was a walk-on. You think him. You go back to Jack Kerner. He was a walk-on, or if anything, he was maybe like a 1 or a 2-star, or maybe a 3-star. There was another guy that was also I think back when Sam Brinks played. I'm trying to think who he was, but regardless, so it just always seems like we always get these guys that are just out of nowhere. We never think are going to be good, and then they end up being really good for us. John Nestor's another example. I guarantee you, like, he is going to be pretty good for us as the years go on. I mean, it's the same thing with like Riley Moss. Like we looked at him and was like, what? Who is this guy? Why is this guy out there? And then you see him getting drafted in the NFL draft. So never discount what Phil Parker does or what he says or the players that he has out there. Unlike the offense, where it's a little bit more like, I don't know.
Right. Like years past, you hear like you hear the offense is heading in the right direction. You're like, oh boy, I'll believe it when I see it. You could trust Phil's word. I mean, this is his word, and that means a lot because he just continues to impress with not always the best talent. Yes. He just the development on that side of the ball is insane.
And then one last thing with yesterday is the special teams. That's another thing that we don't really talk about, but I thought the new punter, who's going to be, I think, a good replacement for Torrey. I don't think it's going to be quite as good as Torrey, but Rise Dakin, I think I said his name right. I don't know. Maybe it's different, but he's an Australian punter. And he had some nice punts yesterday, including one that was about 60, 70 yards. And then he also had some nice punts that had some nice touch on it. Once again, though, then there was a few that, weren't as good. So it's just like living up to Torrey. It's not going to happen the first year, nor do we expect that to, but I think he's going to be a great replacement for him. And then Drew Stevens, who we have to remember got benched during the Nebraska game last year. But he is our starter come this year. The other kicker graduated. He went 2 for 3 from 50 plus yards yesterday, which I think is pretty good. So I thought all around the special teams looked pretty good yesterday.
Yeah. And considering the conditions, right? Windy, cold, not ideal conditions for a perfect spring game. So I thought they played pretty well. And like you said, special teams, as much as we maybe don't want it to be, it'll still be a big part of this team. And the style which we play, I think it always is, going to come down to that third phase sometimes in a game, in a big game where, if you can make your field goals and you can hit your punts right, it's a big deal. So special teams will always be a big key. And I think we've got guys that, can do the job.
So I'm going to now get into, as we kind of wrap up this episode, we're done with the spring game now. We move forward. But I do want to go back to 3 days ago, Tim Lester's presser, and just a few things. There was a quote that I took out of it that really made me excited, but it also made me think of of how bad the offense was the last how many years with Brian Ferentz. But so number one, though, is 85% of the playbook has been installed, and they've been kind of just, working on that. And then I'm sure come fall, they'll finish up everything else that they've been adding. And I'm sure as the months go on, they'll be adding some more. But I thought this quote was interesting. A reporter asked him if he watched any games from last season, and his response was, "Our system is nothing like what's been done here in the past. I really want to give everybody a clean slate." To me, that makes me think that he knew that it was broken, that the old system was broken, it was outdated, and it's nothing like what it's been done in the past. And I love that quote because it goes back to Brian's offense the last how many years and how truly bad it was. And I was listening to Chad and Scott Doctrine on Legends and Listeners, and they discussed a few plays in particular that I kind of forgot about last year. The one being the Wisconsin game when we did that end around with Nico on 4th and 4. I don't know if you remember that one.
Oh,
play.
I remember it.
And
I listened to that too. And when they brought that up, I was like, oh my God, that made me so mad.
Yep.
Continue.
And then the Northwestern game, they also mentioned that one where Nico, the full motion to their side, and then he went 30 yards upfield. Number one, Nico's just not a player that you should be doing that with. That's not the right player to do that. And like, why are you doing that in the first place? And it ended up being intercepted, right? So, and then I went back and actually watched some of that Wisconsin game myself yesterday morning after I listened to that. And there was a 3rd and 7 in particular. And this was more towards the beginning of the game. It was 3rd and 7, and 2 of our wide receivers ran routes, not even to the sticks. One of them was literally the line of scrimmage. He did like a little inside route, and he literally ended up like where the line of scrimmage started at because it was a shotgun. And then the other one ran like a 4-yard out. So it's like, what, even if you throw them the ball, it doesn't even get to the first down mark. It was like things like that. It was like, oh my God, like, what are we doing? I'm not saying it's probably going to happen some too with Leicester. Like, I'm not saying that, it's going to be all good. It's going to be beautiful. Like, there's going to be things. I'm sure there'll be games. There'll be moments where we're like, oh my gosh, this offense is still, right. Yeah. It's going to take time. It's going to be like one of those things where it's not going to be pretty, but Brian's offense was truly horrible. And so I wanted to recount 6 reasons why I was like, okay, thank God, or like why Brian's offense and why Brian Ferentz was arguably one of the worst offensive coordinators that ever called an offense. So number one, and this is not really in any order. I'm just giving the 6 reasons.
I didn't know you were doing this. So this is hilarious.
Number one, it was so predictable. I think we can all agree with that, right? And we talked about that before when we were talking about the run game and the motions. And now, like before, it was like we were up in the stands and we could literally call out what the play was going to be.
If we knew it, the defense on the opposing team knew it, as they've actually admitted in like press conferences leading up to or after games. It's hilarious.
Who was that safety for Minnesota at the NFL draft? Someone asked him, and he's like, he's like, the entire second half, we knew what was coming. We knew every single play that was coming. Going back to where everybody gives shit about our offensive line. I keep saying it. I do not think our offensive line is as bad as what everybody thinks. When the defense knows what's coming, yes,
when it's 9 on 5, come on. It ain't their fault then.
Yeah. Number 2, couldn't find ways to get the playmakers the ball. I think this is a big one because, man, you go back and you look at some of the wide receivers that we had. I mean, even Caleb Brown last year, it took until the Northwestern game. And even after that, though, we still didn't get him the ball that much. Think about like Tyrone Tracy, who's going to be an NFL draft pick.
Potentially a day 3 guy, I'm hearing.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
And we kind of gave shit about Tyrone Tracy. And it's like, we just didn't utilize him. Correct.
No.
Yeah.
I think the biggest one is Charlie Jones. It 100%. Was embarrassing seeing the following year how good he did at Purdue. Like, remember that first game of the season when they played Penn State? I think they played Penn State that first game. It was a Thursday night game. It was before the entire season started. And I remember, didn't he have like 150 yards or something like that? And it's like, okay. Like, what?
There was games where he had 12, 13, 14 catches. They force-fed him the ball.
Brian literally didn't know how to get the playmakers the ball. He didn't know how to. And then, this is my third one. He misused players on certain plays. So what I mean by that is, okay, like you go back to that end around on 4th and 4 with Nico. Why are we using Nico in that? Why aren't you using Caleb Brown or like Seth Anderson, someone that's quick, fast,
Weegan. Like I 100%.
So misused players on certain plays. I thought that, and you could probably go back and you could probably find a lot of examples of that. Number 4, 0 adjustments. You go back to that Tennessee game in particular when they had 3 guys in the secondary. That was like their first game because a lot of guys opted out, and we looked like we didn't do anything to attack that, or you just look like in a game. Like you go into halftime, we come out in the second half, we look exactly the same, like 0 adjustments made. Or
even after like we use a bye week and we don't really adjust for the team we're playing, that type of thing too. Yep.
Because it seems like every bye week we go in and
do what we do. And it's like,
what did we do?
Yeah.
Number 5, when we did find something that worked, we abandoned it. And credit goes to Scott here on The Athletic. He mentioned from 2020 to 2023, when we did jet sweeps, we averaged 5.95 yards per carry on jet sweeps. On motion alone, we averaged 4.35 yards per attempt on just motion alone. That's over 4 yards per carry. In the passing game, we were close to 61% completion rate when we ran some sort of motion. But if you think about it, we rarely did that. Why? Or here's another one, and Chad brought this one up, Wildcat with Goodson. I remember in 2020 that worked pretty damn good.
Yes.
And we completely abandoned that.
Yep.
Or you go back to last year, the Northwestern game, I think it was in the second quarter, we brought in Cooper DeJean for a couple of offensive plays. It worked. And I remember we went into halftime. Caleb Brown changed his number to 81 because the thought was that we were going to use Cooper some more in the second half.
And at the same time, you have to change their numbers.
Yep. Yeah. And in the second half, we didn't see it at all. So
that's a good example of like misusing your players and abandoning what's working, right? Like that's a combination of both. That's just, that's funny. Yeah.
So that's number 5. And then number 6, and I think this is the biggest one, this one, I think, kind of wraps up everything, and that's weak recruiting at the quarterback position. You look at our quarterbacks, 2017, Peyton Manziel, he's done. Spencer Petras, he transferred. Alex Padilla, 2019, he transferred. Deuce Hogan, he transferred. 2021, Joe Labus, he transferred. 2022, Carson May, he transferred. Literally every single player that we have recruited from 2017 to 2022 has left. And it's not because they're good and they're leaving to go to a better team. It's because they're all pretty bad. And they're going to a
Brian
team.
Take over?
2017. That's why I'm doing until 2017.
Yeah, that's fair.
So crazy. It's really hard to have a good offense when you're recruiting these quarterbacks that are not D1 level and they're not very good. They come here and they end up transferring. Like I said, all these guys went somewhere else. Like Carson May, he went to Wyoming. And I think I just saw actually a couple weeks ago that he's transferring again. Alex Padilla went to SMU and he's like the third string quarterback. I don't even know where. I think Payne Manziel went to some really small school in Texas. Spencer Petras now at Utah State. And then the attrition at wide receiver. So you go, and I'm going to go through this. I did some research on Friday of the players that we recruited. So in 2017, and this was the only year that we actually kept all 3 guys for every single year, and that was Brandon Smith, Emir Smith, and then Max Cooper. And if you think about it, Brandon Smith and Emir Smith had pretty good careers at Iowa, but I think we underutilized the shit out of them. And Emir Smith Marset actually goes on Twitter ever so often. He's an Iowa guy. He's pro Iowa, but he does say it sometimes where he's like, I didn't get the ball enough.
I think
he throws a shot a little bit. Yeah. 2018, Tyrone Tracy. Well, he's gone. He went to Purdue. Nico Raganini, he was the one that actually stayed with us and had a decent career at Iowa. I think if he had a better quarterback, he probably would have been a little bit better. And this is where it gets really bad. Okay. 2019, Desmond Hudson. I don't even know where he went. Oliver Martin, he was a transfer. I think he's still at Nebraska, maybe. I don't know. Charlie Jones, we all know what happened with him. Goes to Purdue, just lights out. Now he's in the NFL. 2020, Deontay Vines, well, he transferred. AJ Lawson, I don't know where he ended up. Quavon Matthews, I don't know where he ended up. 2021, Keegan Johnson, well, he went to Kansas State. Arlen Bruce went to Oklahoma State, but, that whole gambling situation. And then Brody Breck plays baseball now, which I don't blame him because, he's going to be a first-round draft pick in the MLB draft. And then 2022, Jacob Bostic, well, now he's transferring. And then that leaves 2023 with Jarriett Bowie and Dane Howard. But literally every single player since 2019 that was wide receivers that we recruited has either went to a different program or has gone. And unlike the quarterback position where these guys, like the quarterbacks were just bad, they just weren't very good. Some of these guys at the wide receiver position were actually decent. We just underutilized the shit out of them. We didn't get them the ball and they left. Like Charlie Jones, Tyrone Tracy, Keegan Johnson, Deontay Vines. I don't know about him. He was okay. Yeah. He went to Old Dominion. I think that kind of tells you he's not that good. It's going to be interesting to see what Jacob Bostic ends up at and stuff like that. But long story short, that is the reason. Attrition at wide receiver because we don't utilize them. Why would any good wide receiver want to come to Iowa? Or if you are good, if you end up developing into a good wide receiver, why would you stay, go somewhere else, and then just weak recruiting at quarterback position? And that was my 6th reason. And then I guess I didn't put this at number 7 because this doesn't really affect the game, but the press conferences with Brian Ferentz were so bad. Going back to like last year at this time when someone asked him like, what's going to be different this year? And he's like, we're going to do the same thing we did last year, just do it better. Or
crazy quote right there. That's insane.
What's the upside of bringing in the backup quarterback? Like so far, Lester's talked to the media twice. I know it's only been 2 times, but every single time I walk away like this guy knows what he's talking about, right? He actually gives thoughtful answers. He doesn't seem like a prick. He seems confident. He seems like he knows what he's talking about. Unlike Brian,
because he knows the game.
Yeah, because he knows, exactly. He's been there before, right? Brian just came off as a prick, as a guy that thought he was better than everybody else in the room. And some of the stuff that he said, like, you can't tell me that didn't affect. Like when he says, "What's the upside of bringing the backup quarterback?" Like, what do you think that makes Alex Padilla feel? Like, there's no way Alex Padilla saw that and was like, "Oh, that's fine." I would be like, "What the fuck? The hell did I do?" It's just things like that, man. Like I just wanted to give you that because I thought it was kind of fun, kind of a fun thing to do because it makes you appreciate. Thank God Brian Ferentz is gone. I can't imagine if Brian Ferentz was still here. Like, once again, the offense still has a long ways to go. And yesterday showed that, right? Like, there were some bad plays. There were some good plays, but there were some bad plays.
Year.
But exactly. At least it's a new offense. And it's like, can you imagine like if we still had Brian, like it just would feel like, wow, like it's going to be the same thing.
Yeah. And here's another thing. And this goes to kind of your last point where it's like, Tim about Brian and just Tim knowing what he's talking about. You've mentioned it to me, and I don't remember if you mentioned it on the last podcast or not, but you're like, isn't it interesting how like Iowa football will tweet out like videos of him in like the meeting rooms and like talking football and how they like never did that with Brian?
Never saw that with Brian.
Isn't that
why?
Weird coincidence? Yes. It's because he knows what he's doing. He can speak the game. He can teach the game. And I think that's all part of the reason why you get guys to actually develop at their position and to stay and to all that.
I will say yesterday, and I'm not just saying this to try to perk up, Lester, but I did see with both quarterbacks, Deacon Hill obviously looked worse, but I think Deacon's just Deacon. But like with Marco, he does look better. And I really think having an actual quarterbacks coach in Lester, guy that has played that position before, knows what it takes. I do think that there's going to be improvement in the quarterback room. I really do. And that mic up that you're talking about, which came out, I think 2 Fridays ago, just watching that, you could tell he's a teacher and he is the perfect person to develop some of these guys. I really want to know what Brian did during like quarterback meetings, things like that, because once again, he didn't play that position. And I'm just, thank God that we have moved on. Once again, who knows if it's going to be much better. But at least there is change. And that is something that we have asked for how many years? Can we just have change, whether it is good or bad? Like, we never know, but can we at least try something different? Because clearly it's not working. And when you have quotes like, we're going to do the same thing we did last year, but just do it better. I can't believe we were like, and I'm going to fully admit it. Like, I can't believe I was so naive to that. Like, I can't believe I saw that and kind of brushed it under the rug a little bit, because it's like, and I think it's mainly because we got like Cade and we got some of these transfers and we're like, oh, should be better. But like, you read that quote and it's like puzzling, because it's like, you can't possibly think that what you've been doing is fine and you're just magically going to be better this year because you have some better players on your roster. No, it takes way more than that. So, I'm just,
and then you're right, really quick. It's like, if and when we start recruiting and developing the quarterback play at a higher level, that only helps the wide receivers, not only to stay, but to grow, to be better, to be able to do more things. It starts with the offense. Like you said, we're fixing that now, hopefully with Tim, at least laying the foundation now here in spring ball. And hopefully Cade is healthy and he's balling out, or we get, like you said, another guy in the portal to help that room and to make it grow, because then it just makes everything around it so much better.
I think it's going to be also easier. It's still going to be hard until we prove it, but I think it might be a little bit easier recruiting wide receivers with Lester because of his track record with some of the wide receivers he had at Western Michigan, right? Hey, look at what I did with this guy. It wasn't just one guy. It wasn't just Sky Moore. He had some really good wide receivers, and I might maybe on one of the next episodes kind of go through some of the wide receivers. I did that with Colby like 2 months ago, but like I said, some people probably didn't listen to that. And it is like he had some really good wide receivers, and some of these guys like ended up transferring because it's Western Michigan, right? And so like you got like Jalen Reed, who balled out freshman year for Leicester and transfers to Michigan State because it's just a better program, and then goes off to the Packers, and he's a really good wide receiver for the Packers. So it's players like that. So it's gonna be interesting to see. Once again, if we wrap all this up, the next week or two is going to be very telling with the transfer portal. My hope
Yep.
is a quarterback, a wide receiver, maybe defense tackle. Now, Brad Heinrich's ahead of the swarm. He feels very confident. Like he said yesterday, someone put in the boards like we really needed a wide receiver, and he came back and said we will get one. Don't worry, or a quarterback, excuse me.
Quarterback.
And then someone else
Which
said,
is huge to hear from the head of Swarm, who
yep.
knows quite a bit. So yeah.
Someone else there was another guy that was like, okay, so if we get a quarterback, it's going to be Cade, Marco, transfer, Deacon, and he like quoted him back in the boards and said, no, if we get a quarterback, it's going to be Cade, transfer, Marco, Deacon.
Yeah.
So that was good to see. And then there was someone else that asked him or something like that, and he said, ideally, we're going to try to get 3 transfers, 1 quarterback, 1 to 2 wide receivers, and possibly a defensive tackle. So it's like seeing the 1 to 2 wide receivers makes me think, wow, are they really going to maybe try to go after 2? Do they really want to get, I mean, I would be for it. If you could get 2 wide receivers, I'd be for it.
Yeah.
But, and then one other person said something like, how are we going to do this when we're already over scholarships? And he's like, don't worry, that's going to go down as well. Meaning there's going to be transfers that are going to be coming out here shortly, which there's going to be. Like, I fully expect, for me, I told my brother this, Colby, I said, as long as it's not an impactful starter, like it is what it is. Like if Jaswin ends up leaving, I don't want to see him go, but it's like, I don't blame him. Yeah. And as long as it's not someone like Caleb Brown or someone like that, where it's like, wait, what? This guy's leaving? Like, no, we need him. Or, someone impactful. It is what it is. I could see maybe a linebacker leaving just because it's like that. Yeah. The room is so stacked, right? So, but yeah, we'll just kind of monitor that. I'm sure that'll probably be our next episode, is kind of going over that. I'm sure we'll land somebody here coming up here soon, whether it is a quarterback, whether it is a wide receiver, or both. We will land somebody, I'm sure of it. And like I said, Brad Heinrich's head of the swarm is confident, so I should be confident as well with that. So we will end it there. So that was a good episode, kind of a longer episode, but I thought it was good. And we'll be back. Like I said, probably the next week. We'll kind of see how the transfer portal plays out, and we'll kind of go from there. I wouldn't mind maybe doing an NFL draft one, maybe after kind of going over some of the picks and things like that. So we'll kind of have to see how that all plays out. I'm going to be gone most of this next week, so it's going to be tough to do one, but maybe next week we can fire up the mic and talk that too. So just kind of go from there. Sure. But all right, well, that will do it for this episode. Thank you guys all for listening, and go Hawks.